Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. Once again, we have a very special guest with us. We have the Measured Mom, Anna Geiger. And let me tell you a little bit about Anna. Anna has classroom experience from first through fifth grade. After earning her master's degree in curriculum and instruction, she began caring for her children at home. Since 2013, Anna has served educators through her blog, The Measured Mom, where she shares hands on lessons, thoughtful articles, and printable resources. She hosts a weekly podcast called Triple R Teaching, and she provides thousands of resources to members of her membership site for pre K to third grade educators. Her book, Reach All Readers, is being released on July 23rd. And I had the pleasure of reviewing it, and it's fabulous. And we're looking forward to the release. And this is our Mother's Day special. So, I think probably having Measured Mom with us, she has 6 children, is the perfect person to share this with. Our article for this evening comes from the Goyen Foundation website, and it's called Putting the Structure into Structured Literacy. And it was put out in 4 parts. We will be focusing on part 4, but it is recommended to read all 4 parts. And it was written by Casey Jurgens, and that was at the end of March. And we're going to just dive right into this. The article is really about which ELA practices should be removed. And since Anna really has a plethora of materials on her website, I think she's the perfect person to kind of bring on to ask about which practices, materials we could let go, and which ones are really important to keep. So, Anna, it starts off with talking right off with guided reading. And it says in the article that rather than focusing on leveled books, we should really have groups based on skill needs, skill based grouping. Could you maybe talk a little bit about why this seems to be at the top of everyone's list?
Yeah. So first of all, I did have Casey on my podcast as well. He talked about whole group phonics instruction and then differentiation after. And he and I also, like him, I started out as a balanced literacy teacher. That's what I was as a teacher. And even as I started my website for quite a few years. So for me, guided reading has to go because that's sort of how you organize a balanced literacy classroom. Like that's how it all starts. Like if someone asked me, how do you teach reading? I would say, well, I put kids, it's a very individualized approach. I put kids into books that are their level and I support them as they move along. That's exactly what I would have said. And so this idea that teaching reading is moving kids through arbitrary levels doesn't pin down anything in terms of specifically what skills they need to master, where they're going next. And honestly, as a teacher, I didn't know. I didn't know what you needed to know to get from an E to an F. So I think that's because that is the structure around which everything revolves in a balanced literacy classroom. It's a good thing to talk about first.
Yes. Judy, your school, as you had mentioned, is using now a core program for its major reading instruction. How does guided reading fit into this? Was it removed? Was it changed? Was it altered in some way?
All right, so very interesting question. So basically, when I started the school year, this was my first full year coaching in this particular building. We were rolling out curriculum. There was a very heavy focus on tier 1 instruction, meaning how do we get as many kids as possible and instruct them well? And that was a very big priority. deep in my heart, I was worried because I knew that kids also need that attention of small group reading instruction. But we worked very hard at solidifying the core instruction, tier 1, our phonics lessons, our phonemic awareness lessons. Then we also went into our next step with tiered instruction. We moved into our shared reading protocols. We use GEODS for that. Now that we've covered all those pieces, I've been talking a lot to everybody in the building about the application piece of reading. It is such an integral part of reading instruction, and people often don't realize, unless they do it, how hard it is to teach some kids how to read. So my teachers kind of freaked out. We had a PD a little while ago, and when I said guided reading is no longer, what we're going to follow, there was almost like a grieving process for them. Not for me, because I've been in this structured literacy path for like 7 or 8 years now. But they were really concerned, what does that mean? And I think that for a little while, I'm going to be honest, I didn't see enough small group reading instruction going on, because I think there was this focus on new core curriculums, whether it be HMH or expeditionary learning or wit and wisdom, strengthen the core, strengthen the core, strengthening the core. There's also been a learning curve for teachers, right? They're getting all these new programs that they may not be very familiar with. But my gut feeling, and I am pretty confident, is small group instruction is still an important part of the reading block. And I think the way that it's easiest to explain to my teachers, so it was no longer a grieving process, was explaining, like Anna mentioned, that it's really shifting to really knowing what skills our students need to know. Are they working on silent E and foundations? Now they get to see those words in a book. Show them how to decode those words. So once they started to understand that we're not letting go of small group reading instruction, but just going in with a different lens, I think that grieving process is finally over. And I actually ran a professional development session on it today. I actually handed out a template by Wiley Blevins to my teachers, a decodable book protocol. And we're still in the early stages in my school. Like another school that I coached, I was there for 5 years. So we did so much work with what that looks like. But I think it's a process. And I think one of the most important things that I was able to explain to my teachers were, why are we shifting away from levels, especially what used to be known as level A, B, C, D, and E? Why are we moving away from that? There are so many reasons why. And I think even if you listen to me in my earlier podcast, when we just started this journey with Faith, I was in a very different place than I am now. I finally really, really, really do not use those books for my beginner readers. Faith, do you want me to tell them why? Faith,
Oops,
you're muted, my love. Faith,
I'm not muting anymore. Because I always forget.
Faith, I didn't tell everybody why I shifted. Do I tell them now or save it for later?
Save it.
All right, I'm saving it.
Saving it. But I think that, in listening to you, Judy, I think it is like a mourning process, and people feel very attached to what they've done. And I think giving them the why behind it is extremely important. I love how you mentioned Wiley, that you're using some of his work. We've had Wiley Blevins on, and he's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, and I think he's very practical in what resources he creates for people that are just starting out on his journey. His lesson plan template is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to lie. Some of the question parts did look a little bit like what we were used to before, but I think it's a good bridge to really start using books without fully being like, oh my God, in a total overload. I gave out other templates as well, from Letters, a modified small group template as well. I think it's important to give our teachers some options, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that deliver those lessons. But I think, Faith, you said something very smart. I think that the what and the why is so important. And on social media, some people are like, no, just give people this, just give people this, just give them a box. No, We have to start prioritizing, explaining the what and the why to teachers, because teachers are not robots. Teachers are thoughtful practitioners that need to know the what and the why, because if you don't know the what and the why, you're never going to get the right results, and you're not going to teach kids how to read well.
Yeah. And you're not
Knowing
going to embrace it. You're not going to
But
embrace it.
you know what's hard on social media? That it's a lot of these people that are saying these things are not even near a classroom teaching kids.
Well, that's another podcast. All right. So Anna, let's move on to some of these other practices. So they mention in here round robin reading, leveled classroom libraries. Let's go with the round robin reading, because that, I do think, quite honestly, has gone away quite a bit. I don't really see that as much. What are your thoughts, Anna, on that?
Well, I think, see, I'm not seeing that in here. I'm looking for that, and I'm not seeing the round robin reading.
In part 4, it mentioned round robin reading and shifting the focus more to choral and close.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I know round robin was heavy when I was in school myself.
Me too.
I don't know, like I think it's guided reading teachers weren't really doing. I don't think round robin was really a thing in balanced literacy that I can really think of, because there was all these small groups working. But now that a lot of teachers are shifting to more whole group, it's a little tricky to figure out how to give everybody a chance to participate. So I think the idea of having kids choral read with the teacher is a good alternative. And we know that that builds fluency. I think, though, I like what you said, Judy, before about how the small groups are a place for kids to read, because that is a concern of mine too, that with a whole lot of whole group, it's really hard to hear individual kids read, especially having 25 kids. It's just really tough. Today I was in 4 schools today doing some lessons, and yeah, and it was only a group of like 10 kindergartners in one class, and it was still really hard to listen to one child read a book. It takes a couple minutes and the other kids are finished, and it's a tricky thing. So teachers have to find a way to give everybody a chance to read and to hear them. And round robin, we know, isn't the way, because you're just picking random kids. But what are your thoughts on how teachers can fit reading in, can listen to everybody read?
So, getting back to round robin, just to be clear,
Yeah.
round robin, for those people listening, is just making sure that every kid has a turn, and they just kind of go around in a circle,
Right.
and the kids expect when their turn is coming. They could even count off and know. And sometimes they're not even paying attention to what they're reading because they're anxious about getting their turn in. So I don't like round robin reading at all. Hopefully, most people aren't using it. But as you mentioned, it is a little bit tricky. Choral reading is having everybody read the same passage together. And then there's, of course, close reading, where we leave out certain words as the teacher is reading. And then the kids have to keep up and fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's echo reading, where the teacher's a bit ahead of the other kids and they are trying to keep up with the teacher. And all of this is to work on fluency.
Yeah.
So if fluency is the goal, then those are really good strategies. Round robin is really just trying to give everybody a chance. And sometimes some kids are quite slow and other kids are zipping through, and it's not a very effective form of getting kids to read. So Judy, Anna asked a really good question about getting kids to read and having the teacher listen to them. Any thoughts about that in your school?
All right, so that is my area of passion. We've spoken a lot about this with Tim Rasinski. I strongly suggest that for early readers, there is some shared reading protocols. We're using a lot of decodable texts now for our protocols for our kids. But I think it aligns with the science of reading. It does, because you have to think, what level of support do my kids need to access this text? Maybe one day they're listening to the text just to start hearing the oral language. Then you have to play around with the echo and the choral, right? An echo read is more supportive. You hear me say it, now you say it. The next day I might shift into a choral read where more voices are coming in. The last day I might have really let go a little bit because I know my kids can do this. And I might let them read more. And I might let them go read the text with a partner, hear
Right.
each other reading. Also, if I want to hear how they read, I'm going to monitor more closely with progress monitoring on the oral reading fluency assessment with the screeners. I think it's really important that we hear our kids read. I recently ran a professional development session, and there were a little bit of knots in my stomach because I feel like as we're shifting, or a lot of schools are shifting, we're not listening to kids read as much as they should. And I said, when's the last time you listened to every kid in your class read? And there was just like this moment of silence. And I think it was like a aha moment of realizing, without that application piece and really hearing our kids read, we're not going to shift that needle. It shouldn't be a surprise on how the kids are reading just when they take that end of year final benchmark for their screener or so forth. The other thing that I think is really important is I've really pushed myself in the last couple of years of how to make phonics instruction more impactful for all students. And I've been working a lot on, instead of that one kid at a time, I still see a lot of teachers do one kid at a time. You lose those kids. Anita Archer says, brisk, brisk, brisk. So I do a lot of choral responses where I'm taking my magic wand and I'll do a lot of like everyone questions. What sound does that vowel make, everyone? What syllable type is it? Draw, mark it in the air. So I think that, the moments in the day are so precious and so limited. We have to always think about how can we make it more impactful. And I think that the reason that I'm still learning is because I see my teachers in the field. It's such a beautiful thing to be a coach with your teachers.
Mhm.
And then I work with kids as well. That's where I learn a lot of things. Like I saw a teacher put a sentence on the dry erase board. And I knew that kids were having trouble with phrasing and fluency. They sounded robotic or they couldn't recall the sentence. And very often I had them write one part of the sentence here, then another part of the sentence there. And for some kids, that was confusing. So then the teacher wrote the sentence totally across. And what we thought of on the spot was like, oh, we could scoop one part, like the dog is running in the park. The dog is running. We just scoop that part. And then for the kids that couldn't recall, go write the dog is running instead of word by word. And then in the park. So I think, it's easy for people on social media to just say, oh, knowledge is the only thing that matters and everything else comes. No, kids have to be shown and teachers have to be shown and I have to still be shown, because that's what explicit teaching is all about.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Like you said, first of all, the routines are so important to do that choral, like to have them, but you have to really practice that and you have to really train the kids to do that well. I was working on that with some kids today and it was, it takes time, but once you do it, then you can move more quickly and then you can have those routines. I think a buddy reading time is really important. And to give them enough material to go through so that they're not just reading their book and they're finished, but to slowly put those together. At least that gives them a chance and you can come and listen. Like it'd be nice to have a buddy reading time where you're free, right? And you're moving around and checking. They could even record it, I suppose, and you could listen to it.
Yeah, I think that, we know that independent reading is a tricky one because just letting them read on their own, we know is often a waste of time, especially for those struggling readers. So, it's a tricky balance to be able
That's
to.
funny that you say it, Faith, because there's people in the field, and not at my school, but I've just heard in general, some people are having a really hard time letting go of the independent reading. They're like, what happened to drop everything and read? So, yeah.
So I think that we have to give them a chance to read, but it has to be accountable.
Yes.
And setting up some type of accountability for independent reading, whether they're going to have to respond to something in writing, and each person has to respond so that you know that they're actually doing the reading, having some type of meeting about it. There needs to be some accountability rather than just, oh, like you mentioned, Judy, the drop everything and read, where it's just, pick up your books and read for 10 minutes and then put them away, or 15 minutes. We have to be able to have a way of gauging what they're doing. So moving along, this article mentions quite a few practices that, should be taken out of the reading block to make room for what is evidence-based. And a couple of these activities they mentioned here were word coffins, word sorts, cut and paste activities, rainbow writing. Those are just a few. Off the top of my head, looking at the article, any thoughts, Anna, about any of these that I just mentioned? Those were just quick ones that I just ran through. What's your thinking about those?
Yeah, so I know he's talking about word coffins. I don't know if Lynn Stone coined that, but the idea that you have shapes, rectangles in the shape of the letters, and students are basically memorizing the shape of the word by fitting those letters in there. We know, of course, that doesn't make any sense.
Configurations.
Okay.
That's what I used to call it. So it's word configurations, where we would trace around the word, look at the shape of how the word would look. I didn't want to interrupt you, but that came to my mind. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So I know, of course, we know that's not how word learning works. It's not a visual memory process, so we can just toss that away. I think the word sorts. So I was very much a word sorting teacher, and I know that what I did, it lacked a lot of explicit instruction. Like, that was basically my phonics instruction when I was Balanced Literacy, and I had more of a reading workshop model. And so I would teach them the phonics pattern, but kind of indirectly. So they would sort the words, and I would kind of say, what do you notice? Like, how are these different? And I know that there's some value in some instruction like that, but initially teaching phonics skills, it should be direct and explicit, which I wasn't doing. And it did take a lot of time to sort these words, cut them out, sort them, paste them. And he's right. I mean, I agree with him here where he says it's mostly a waste of time if you're just kind of looking by sight and sorting. I think word sorts that can be useful are like writing sorts, where they're given a set of words that are of different patterns that they've been taught, and they sort them into columns by writing them in the appropriate column. And then they have to talk about why they're sorted a certain way. So I don't think that we have to get rid of word sorts entirely, but I know that the way I was using them wasn't very impactful. And I agree that anything that involves a lot of cutting and pasting by the teacher or the students, right? So like cutting out all these little phonics puzzles, I think we just need to let go because that is so time consuming.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you talked about the word sorts. I think what they mentioned in this article, and I would have to agree, is that, kids just are looking at the letters and they're saying, oh, there's a CK here. These words, all are CK words, we'll put them down here. And they're not really paying attention to the whole word. And then it becomes almost like a word search, like a letter search, rather than getting something out of it. And this could easily be improved if we have a sound and we're doing this with them, trying to sort words and making sure they could read the words and noticing which letter patterns would fit with a certain column. Judy, any thoughts that you have about any of these things I just mentioned, whether it's the word coffins or configurations, sorting, cut and paste activities, or rainbow writing? Let me just let everybody know what rainbow writing is, just so we're clear. And that is the idea of taking different colored markers and tracing over the letters again and again and again in different colors for practice. Any thoughts, Judy, on any of those?
So it's interesting, I haven't seen as many stations lately, but a lot of teachers are thinking about, the application piece of reading and what do I do with the other kids while, I'm leading my small group. So it's not easy. I don't know how much research there is actually behind centers and the impact, but I think a lot of the things that I've seen in the field, and even what you mentioned, Faith, is a lot of work in isolation. And that's really my concern. Kids are doing things that are isolated, right? In foundations or in phonics instruction, they see a word, they spell a word. What's a higher level of rigor is writing a sentence. So I think we have to think about, what do those kids need right now to help them become a reader? And I think if we do those procedures that we mentioned before, like the choral reads and the echo reads, and we give them text that they've actually experienced, that's great practice material. So I definitely, and this is my opinion, I think it will be very impactful to give kids more reading material during those times. Even if the teacher's not leading the group, at least you gave them something that they had practiced with, and then you could check in with them. The other piece is, so rainbow writing, adios amigos, sei gesund, whatever. Definitely, до свидания. That's now 3 languages, now in English. Throw it out. I think there is something that you can do using a different color. So a lot of teachers are now teaching what's known as trick words, but I don't like that word because they're not fully tricky. We know some parts are tricky and some parts are phonetic. I think it might be helpful to do those words, like a word like said. The S is phonetic. The AI is not phonetic in that word. It's saying eh. So highlighting sometimes letters in different colors that are irregular and talking about those could be helpful. What do you think, Faith? Like in a word like car, if you take the AR and you put the AR in a different color so it highlights, the word patterns. I think that's a smarter use of your magic marker. We also put hearts on top, but I think it's important to start shifting. What are we doing with these words? We're not doing just these flash drills anymore, or these.
So I'll tell you what I think, but let's hear from our guest. What are your thoughts about that, Anna?
Yeah, so I find this really interesting because different experts will talk about different ways to practice high frequency words. Like some people will say when you're practicing spelling it, you should say the sounds. So like if you're writing was, as you're writing the W, you say w, and as you're writing the A, you say and the S, you say z. But I hear from other people that are very respected still, even recently, they will say to practice saying the spelling out loud.
Mm-hmm.
So WAS, WAS. And if, one of the ways that people have and I haven't done this, but another approach that's similar to rainbow writing is to color each sound spelling in a different color. So if it's the word park, like you said, P would be one color, AR would be one color, K would be another color. If the point is to have them practice writing the word, that may make sense. I mean, because we don't want them to practice writing the words, but I'm not sure. Does writing a word many times help you remember the spelling? Or is that just handwriting practice? We're kind of moving away from writing words multiple times as spelling practice because that can be very mindless. Yeah. So if we're going to have them be practice writing words, how can we make that be more meaningful?
So here's my thought. I think a lot of that stuff, again, takes time. And I'm not quite sure if you're getting a lot of bang for the buck with all of that. My feeling is with words that have, some low frequency spellings, like you mentioned in said, AI is not a common spelling for the eh sound, but it is a possibility. So it's not really something that you would say, ooh, it can't be sounded out. It could, because we've seen AI in the word again, right? Mm-hmm. And said, it's just another spelling for the sound eh. It just doesn't come up very often. And I think it's important to tell kids that certain spellings come up more often than others. And we want to make sure, certainly, that they know the most common spellings that match up with sounds. But we also have to let them know that there are some spellings that don't come up quite as often. And do we have to put it in a different color? I'm not sure about that. I think this is where maybe sorting would be very helpful, where they could see one long column with just the spelling of E as eh, and then something that's not quite as long with EA as eh, like in head and instead, And then you see your AI spelling for,
Mhm.
we only see a few examples and like, oh, that doesn't come up very often.
Mhm.
And that's where sorting can be extremely helpful. Again, there's no wrong answer here, but going back to what we know about the evidence, we want to make sure we try to use high impact strategies and spend more of our time there. So,
Can
moving
I just
on.
say one thing? Can I just say one thing? I do think that there's a value though, like so foundations, which is not, the program I'm promoting or anything, but I think like so we post those words. And I don't know if maybe this theory has been debunked, but I think part of it is that they're posted so kids utilize them more frequently. And for some kids, it seems to be helping with their automaticity. I don't know if it's research based or evidence based, but if you utilize something a couple of times, doesn't it for some kids go into permanent?
Are you saying for practicing their high frequency words, like they're posted like a word wall?
Yeah. Or whatever it is, a sound wall,
Just a
word
list.
wall.
Yeah.
But if you
Just
use
available
it,
to them.
That's a good segue into word walls and sound walls. Um, Anna, taking what Judy said in this article, they mentioned about getting rid of word walls in favor of sound walls. Now, we had an episode about sound walls. And again, there's a lot of information out there. What are your thoughts about getting rid of word walls in favor of sound walls? And also, there are sound walls with mouth movements, without mouth movements, just the phoneme with the different graphemes. There are different ways to structure it. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I find it very interesting. When I first began learning about the science of reading, this was the thing I read about. This was everywhere, right? Switch to a sound wall, switch to a sound wall, switch to a sound wall. I think that was an easy hook for people. Like, oh, that's something I can do that, right?
Mm.
I think I don't think there's very much. I don't know if there's any published research on sound walls. Actually, there's a little bit about mouth articulation, but like actual using sound walls, I think someone's working on that right now. But I don't. I think what teachers may not realize is that so much about we're hearing about sound walls is different people's opinions, like how to set up a sound wall, why to use the mouth pictures or not use the mouth pictures. And so I think there's some in some people's cases like a concern about, am I doing this right? Am I putting these up right? And I don't think we have to worry about that so much. I think teachers should, if they want to use sound walls as a way to direct students to connect phonemes to graphemes, that's the way I look at it. Like the point of the sound wall is to connect the sounds to the letters, not to overteach a particular phoneme, because that's not where we're landing. We're going to the writing and reading. So like I said, I know there's a lot of different opinions about this. I know that they're a very popular soundwall program. I'm pretty sure teaches all the phonemes before they even get to any graphemes.
Mm.
And then there's other disagreements about that. So I definitely would not call myself a linguist or anything like that. But I feel like sound walls make a lot. I've talked to a lot of teachers who use sound walls with young kids, and they really do refer to those mouth pictures. Like they use them when they're stuck on a word because the teachers showed them how to use them, and they felt they were helpful. On the other hand, sound walls do look really overwhelming to someone who's new to that, for a teacher especially, I think. And if that's something a teacher wants to use, I don't think it's a must. I don't think you have to do that if you're aligning your classroom to the science of reading. But if you're choosing to use a sound wall, don't worry about all the rules and just think to yourself, how can I use this to help my students read and write? And if I don't know how, I'm probably not ready to use one. But if I know, if I can use this and I can figure out that by putting this picture up and this letter or this word, I can teach my students how to use this when they're reading and spelling, then go ahead. But don't be tied up by all the opinions about, where they go and specifically what to do. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, we
You're
had an
both
expert.
safe.
Well, I'm
Here
just
she
saying,
goes.
we had an expert on.
Yeah,
Uh,
I heard
and
that one.
I would recommend, actually, we had two experts on recently talking about the whole issue with the mouth movements. I don't have the episode number right off the top of my head, but if anyone is interested, they can look back on what we talked about with Jan and Ken with mouth picture, mouth pictures on sound walls. But I want to get back to the word wall issue,
Sure.
why it's problematic. Traditionally, word walls were done A to Z, and words would just be plugged in
Yeah.
according to the first letter of the alphabet. So you could have words up there starting with a T, and it might be the word the, and then you would have the word to up on the word wall. And kids, there was no connection to the initial sounds at all. They were just, common words going up. And it wasn't really that helpful. So, Judy, any thoughts on this?
Well, I have to be honest, I have not fully shifted to the sound wall. I found them to be very overwhelming. I was scared to do it wrong. I know a lot of people were just buying these prepackaged ones and just throwing everything out there and putting all these mouths that I think do look creepy. And now there's research to say that there's evidence that sound walls may be effective, but those mouths might not be the best choice. And I know that Anna said that it could be overwhelming for a teacher, but think about how overwhelming that could be for kids. In general, cluttered classrooms don't look good. So I'm playing with sound walls. I haven't fully shifted. We still have a traditional word wall. We are thinking of like expanding that word wall to having sounds, but the danger of having a traditional word wall. Yes, I'm happy my students use it and it's more interactive and they're moving their bodies, but it's very overwhelming for a lot of our struggling learners to find the actual word. Like, I know I told a couple of kids, go find the word her. And it was just so confusing for them to find that word her. And I kept thinking, what could I have done to make that experience easier for them? So if you guys want to give me some feedback.
Well, I have a question. Why was the word her up there? Were they learning that as just a word to memorize? Because that's
foundations
memorization of sight words. So why was her on the list?
So her was part of the unit in foundations, I think. And some of the kids didn't know that ER says
So they weren't up to that part where the sound was taught. Is that it? And they needed the word.
I think part of the problem was maybe they had been taught it, but some of them are still struggling. And now there's so many, and these are my word walls, right? I hop around from class to class and here and there, and do RTI, MTSS as well. When there's a lot of H words on there, that could be very overwhelming for a kid.
Well, there you go. Anna.
Location. So locate it. That's Anna, a problem.
What are your thoughts with that? I mean,
with word walls?
Well, I'm thinking, why would a word like her be even up there unless of course they haven't been taught yet, it's very easy.
But those are the kind of words that are up there. Her,
no, but I'm saying, but I'm just trying to see why that would be one of those words. Your thoughts, Anna, on that?
Yeah. So, right. So I think when I used word walls, it was a memorization tool, right? So like we're flashing the words. Now I'm putting it up here. So if you can't remember how to spell it, here it is. But I didn't do a lot of explicit, like, this is the word her, say the word her. Let's look at let's tap the sounds. Here's how we spell and her. Like, if you explicitly teach the words and then review them, I'm not sure it has to be a bad thing to put it up as a reference to help kids remember.
Right. So we do that part that Anna just mentioned. We all do that. But still, like I said, it's still, even with that instruction, even with that explicit discussion, once it's in a location with a lot of words with an H, the location process is still very hard for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
I talked to a teacher who uses sound walls, and she's the one who told me that the math pictures are really helpful for her first graders, but she is required to use a word wall also. So for her word wall, one way she gets around some of the issues, first of all, she has sections on her word wall for the digraphs, TH, SH, CH. So the would not go under T, it goes under TH, which makes sense if you've taught that. And then she actually has the words sound boxed. So like the word her would have H in one box and ER in the next box. So maybe a little bit more like they were taught them. In terms of kids not being able to find it, maybe the word wall is not the right choice for them at that right time if they're not reading well enough that they can pick a word out. I'm not sure.
And
Yes.
we played with that.
They mentioned one of the things to get rid of, and I would agree with this, is the memorization of spelling words and just the whole idea of memorization of sight words, really. I think that we could all agree is just a waste of time, right?
Why don't we do a cheers button, Faith? You're not getting. Wait, what did we just say goodbye to?
So what did we say goodbye to? Well, I don't think we agreed to that. I think we should say goodbye. I agree with pretty much everything in this article. What they're saying here to say goodbye to, I would agree. So if you want to give a cheers to that, I'm with you. For sure.
I know we're going to take some slack, though. People are going to go nuts about this word wall, sound wall thing.
Well, I mean, again, I think that it's very helpful to have the idea of putting up sounds and possible spellings if it's for spelling, right? Like you could show a kid, look, these are your possible choices. Which one would work here? Oh, it's this spelling for that sound. Yeah, that could be extremely helpful.
Faith, can I ask you for a big favor? You might say no.
What?
I have to. Can you take a picture of one at one of the sites where you coach and show us some nice examples, and maybe we'll put it in the show notes?
We could put in the show notes, or I could do it at another time. You know,
Great. And if you have any nice pictures too, that would be super cool. Because I think visuals could be really helpful for some of our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely could for sure. But it's basically what I said. You have a sound. These are the possibilities, and to list some words under each one so kids could see, well, this is a frequent spelling, this is infrequent, these are your possibilities. And to be able to point and say, this is the spelling that we're going to use.
And here. When we had Jan on, she made a reference to, she showed a picture, remember, with the pan?
Yes. Well, what she was saying is it comes from the word, always starting from the word first before, instead of just this isolated, sound, which is very hard because we hear sounds co-articulated. So she always said, start with the word first. I don't want to talk for Jan, but I think that's what she was trying to stress there. So they mentioned rhyme. Her thoughts about rhyme.
Yeah, that was a tough one for me. I still have some articles on my website. I should probably put a disclaimer on about rhyming, because I always thought that was like the big thing.
That's what we were told.
Yeah. And so with my own kids, that was one of the first things I did with them. And that's a good thing. I mean, rhyming is fun. I think we should do rhyming, but not everybody would even agree with that. Like when I interviewed Susan Brady, my podcast, she said basically we shouldn't teach. Her new conclusion, this was different from what she had said like a couple of years before, was that we shouldn't even teach rhyming or syllable counting in preschool. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that, but I also understand, to me, the bigger point, and I think Casey is really good about nailing this down in the article, is that rhyming is fun and rhyming is useful, but rhyming is not necessary for learning to read. And so we used to get caught up, right? Because I've had people email me and say, they just can't rhyme. They just can't rhyme. What should I do? And I say, move on. My rhyming is going to be hard for them. I always think that if you can't rhyme, it's probably a warning sign that reading is going to be tough, right? But fixing the problem, learning to rhyme will not fix the problem, right?
Yes.
So,
yes, I think as a predictor, rhyming as a predictor, just what you said, if they're having trouble, that's a red flag. But that doesn't mean you have to teach it instead of looking at blending and segmenting.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah. And in a similar thing, what you're just talking about, like the phonemic awareness test that we give, right? Like if kids can blend, segment, manipulate, if they can't manipulate, that may be a sign of a problem. But oral manipulation activities is not the solution, right? It's integrating with letters and actually reading. Um, but yeah, the rhyming is hard to let go of, though, right? Because and I think we need to be
That's
careful
funny.
with that
For me,
too.
it wasn't hard to let go of that one at all.
I think it might depend on the age you're teaching. Like so, like if you're teaching preschool or kindergarten, um, I think we have to be careful to like not to tell people, well, rhyming doesn't matter, so just get rid of it. We don't need to say that either. Like playing with language is really fun and that's important. But I think we can also express that phonemic awareness is really the game changer. And so we need to be doing that in preschool.
Yes, the kids
Yeah,
need a
for
lot
my
of blending and segmenting. Basically, like I've been coaching my teachers now because we've done so many episodes on phonemic awareness about thinking about what is going to have the greatest impact on helping kids learn how to read. And that comes back to teacher knowledge, right? You could be given a program like Heggerty,
Yeah.
and yes, they revised their program. They took out some of the stuff that wasn't as high leverage and they added more of that phonics piece where kids are making sounds, seeing the actual dots for the sounds and then writing the letters. But that comes back to teacher knowledge.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you can't focus more on that skill. And then if there's rhyming in there and that that's not the highest leverage skill, you might need to pivot and give more attention to teaching kids how to decode. So like we have second graders, they're done with it, but some of them, they finished Heggerty, the manual's done. Now my first opinion would probably be spend more time on the reading application piece. But if you're not able to do that and you still have to do phonemic awareness activities, what would be the highest leverage activity that you could do? It's probably blending, right? Hearing the sounds, being able to apply that to decoding skills. So I think teacher knowledge is really important. I really, really feel that way.
So, the blending and segmenting, obviously, both of those are very important. But I think, like Anna said, I'm not giving up on rhymes in nursery school and kindergarten. And look, I did that with my own children. We were singing and doing nursery rhymes, and
Will you do Humpty Dumpty, Hickory Dickory?
every one of them. Every one of them. And I'm always shocked when I'll say something to a kid and they look at me blankly like they've never heard it
Yeah,
before.
I know.
And I find that to be so sad, to be honest, because I do think there is value in singing with kids and
Well,
doing
and that helps their oral language. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Definitely. So I'm with you. I don't think we should get rid of that. But in school, if we're teaching them how to read, phonemes are where it's at for sure. So that can go. Interesting, in this article, they mentioned technology. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. And I was happy to see that Casey said something about shifting away from using technology as an intervention tool. And ideally would be using technology sparingly. I'm interested in hearing from both of you. I want to start with Anna because I have very strong opinions on this, but I don't want to start. So, Anna, why don't we start with you?
So actually, when I was a teacher, I didn't have my kids use any technology. So, I think now, if I were a teacher now, we would use it a little bit more. But like even with my own kids, they have a limited amount of screen time per week. We share an iPad, we share a computer. Like they don't get phones till they're in high school. Like I really have strong opinions about technology use for kids in school and out. And I like when the schools were closed for my kids, it was like 3 months or a couple months, and then they did go back to school with masks the next year. But those a couple of months where my kids were on Chromebooks for hours a day, it was not good for them. And now I lost my train of thought for a second, but I would not be happy if my kids were doing tons and tons of screen time at school. I don't think it's healthy. So I don't know. For me, this was never a problem. Like this was never something I would have had to get rid of because I wasn't doing it. But I 100% agree. Now I'm assuming it's used as an intervention tool because it requires less staff, right? And I get that. Like that makes sense. But I think you'd really have to make sure that's actually doing it. Interesting. This is a total sort of off the subject, sort of. But my kids recently took MAP testing at school, and my oldest two kids are like both their oldest boy and oldest girl, very typical oldest kids, very like focused on their work. They want to get straight A's. They're always working really hard, want to get everything right. They're in very advanced classes. My next one is also smart, but that's not his. He doesn't have to get, I mean, he does get good grades, but he's not really focused on that. So I got his MAP score back and I was like, I mean, I was like, what happened? Like his score on the reading comprehension was really low. I was like, what happened? And he said, oh, they were just so long. I didn't want to read it. So I just picked answers, which that is totally something he would do. And you can't get away with that if you're actually working with an adult, right? You can kind of tell the computer, I don't feel like doing this right now. But so I don't know. I was disappointed in him. He worked much harder the next time with his parents' encouragement. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Faith?
Well, I'm going to ask Judy, what are your thoughts? And then I'll tell you mine on technology for intervention and just in general in the classroom.
So I just want to give a compliment to Anna. Anna, you are so reflective. It is such a joy to listen.
Oh, it's very nice of you.
You're so down to earth. You're able to say what you did before as opposed to what you would do now. That's amazing because I think a lot of people have a hard time letting go of things, and being able to let go of things to benefit kids is such an important part of what it means to be, a good teacher. In terms of technology, should I tell you about how I am as a parent? As a parent, I suck.
All of us could be better. All of us could be better.
I always thought in life that I'm a better teacher than I am a mom. I'm kind of nice as a mom. I don't set limits as well as I should, but in terms of a classroom teacher, I never used a lot of technology in the classroom. It was really reading instruction that was so interactive. But you know what? We can't ignore that technology is now part of student lives. So I think we have to think about how to use it successfully. We can't just ignore it and say it doesn't exist. I mean, it's a beautiful thing that I can do universal screeners using technology now. That's amazing. That's a game changer, that it's making graphs and so forth. But in terms of for student learning, I think what you said, Anna, is partially true. There is, in many places, a teacher shortage. There's not a lot of people to listen to kids read while you're doing your small group. You're thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to have the iReady station or the Lexia station. So I think the important thing to remember with technology is that you could never, ever, ever replace a good teacher.
Yes.
I think initially when I saw a program like Amira hit the market, and I know we don't usually mention programs, I was like, wait a minute. This is AI in the earliest stages of development. I can do better than that. A hell of a lot better than that. And the other concern is we're using, like a lot of schools are relying on these things to screen kids. Now the kids are sitting at a computer by themselves. We don't know if they know how to use a computer. I really think that human interaction, especially with early readers, is so important. And I think it's important to start asking questions. I think a lot of schools have a program and a certain technology program comes with it. Don't ask what comes with it. Ask what has the best evidence and results. Like, I don't see a lot of Lexia learning where I am in New York City, but I know that one's very aligned with letters and with foundations and so forth. And I see a lot of my private clients use it and the kids love it. So I think we have to be mindful of what we're using and what are the results, but you could never, ever replace the teacher.
Yeah. So I am not a fan of technology, especially for intervention. I don't like the idea of a program just telling you which skills you should be teaching and filling in without a teacher listening to that child and being able to see what's going on. Like when I watch a child, I'm watching how they form their letters what they're doing as they're writing, what they're doing. I'm watching everything. And because I'm watching everything, I'm able to make adjustments and alter my instruction based on that. And I really agree with this that it should be limited, really limited in use, and not it shouldn't be what we use as our primary intervention.
Yeah.
That's
not-
funny that you're saying that, Faith, but sometimes the truth is after COVID, I saw a lot of mandates with schools and districts saying they need to do this amount of time. I think that there was this false belief that that was going to help with the academic recovery after COVID.
Well,
And
I think they found out that a lot of things that they thought were not really accurate.
mean that they were BS?
Well, I don't know if I would say BS. I think they were misguided. How about that? I wouldn't call it BS. I think that they were misguided because they assumed that the computer, the technology could do way more than they had expected. And we're seeing that that wasn't exactly correct. So last point here, they mentioned teaching consonant blends.
Yeah.
And I love how Casey said blend is a verb. Okay. And in other words, we should be focused on pushing those sounds together and not teaching adjacent consonants together as something to be memorized, like BL or BR or FL or FR. Anna, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I was Orton Gillingham trained as well. And they were taught as a unit, not as they made one sound, but when we actually did the dictation, they would have, like, if you're spelling the word brag, for example, they did actually have one line for BR, but you were supposed to, like, I forget, like maybe put a squiggly line underneath, something you're supposed to do to show that it was actually two sounds. I don't remember what it was. Oh, it was two lines. It was an extra line, I think. And I didn't like that. And they were even supposed to tap it as one sound, brag. So I really didn't like that. I had to do it that way to pass my videos, but I let go of it afterwards. I think I've heard this for a long time that we need to stop teaching blends. And I think when I first heard that, it was very confusing to me. Like when people were saying that, it felt to me like they were saying basically ignore blends, right? But I think the point is just, sure, we teach kids to read words with blends. It's just that we're not teaching, like you said, on flashcards, which Orton Gillingham does do, like for the drill, at least the program that I did. I mean, there's different ones, obviously. But they were supposed to say "brr," "fool," when they saw those. I don't really see the value in that, because for one thing, it takes a lot more time. Plus, they are going to sound different once you put them in a word. And like you said, once you are learning to blend sounds, you can blend multiple sounds. But I still. And I would agree. Like, I think he says here, they spent 7 to 8 weeks on blends. I think that sounds like a lot, especially probably because you're trying to teach each one individually. I don't have a problem though with saying, this week we're going to work on blends that have the R in them. This week the L. This week the S blends, as long as we're not teaching them as units.
Well, I do think there's a lot of cognitive overload there. It's unnecessary to have to teach it as a unit. Judy, your thoughts?
With you guys, I was OG trained too, but that did not stick with me either.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no harm when kids are marking words that they could put a little dash underneath a blend and having that discussion, but not as a unit. If they know the sounds, that was good enough for me.
That also is also tricky. Like if you teach them as units, that makes it tricky when you're doing word building, right? Because if you're changing slip to snip, right? You don't need to take out SL and put an SN. You just take out one of the letters. So I think that it gets in the way of that too.
Well, right. That's the manipulation. I also think that honestly, doing that puts a vowel sound in between, because most are going to learn that as burr or bull, and it's not, burrick or, full-up. But that's how they will memorize it. They will often say like an O or an because they're isolating it and not saying the whole word.
I didn't see a lot of this in classrooms for the last couple of years. I remember the FNP, I think it was, had this little blend chart, but I haven't seen them in action for a while. Have you?
Well, I could tell you that I have seen it. It depends on what people are trained in. You know, it really depends. But I do think that that should go. And if there are any activities just trying to get consonant blends memorized in some way, it's not very effective. We really need to go back to the phoneme level, I would believe. So, Anna, are there any things that this article did not cover that you would want to remove from the literacy block?
Well, that's a good question.
Maybe you have something that you know of, or you would want to add.
He was pretty
spot on with his
pretty comprehensive. Let's see. Let me think for a second.
Talked about skill-based instead of grade level text-based. I like that. Looking at skill groups. Looked at organizing a library by topic or genre rather than a level. I would agree with that.
I would agree with that, but I would also put in some skills baskets. I think that could be really helpful for our early.
I would too.
I think he was just saying move away from levels, though.
Yeah.
That was the idea of that, was moving away from levels. He talked about too many manipulatives, that's unnecessary for center work. Anything else? Because again, I think he was pretty thorough about this. Anything you would like to add to independent reading or center work or small group work, prioritizing whole class, anything?
Oh, I could talk for a while about the whole group, small group distinction. We're at an hour now, but he and I have talked about this, and I am a little bit concerned about some of the conversations I hear about the science of reading, where people think that the science of reading says no more small group. Like, I do hear that a lot, and I don't know where they're getting that from. I think the concern about the small groups that we used to have was that kids were spending a lot of time working independently, which I understand now that was a problem. And a lot of the center work we were having kids do wasn't always real useful. But I hate to say that the answer is always whole group phonics instruction, even though I know many people do it successfully, including Casey. My concern about that, though, is that sometimes those kids that are well above grade level aren't always being challenged, or maybe should be getting instruction further along in the scope and sequence, which is hard to do in a whole group.
You go! Yay!
But I understand that staffing is an issue, right? So, I mean, ideally, what teachers would do would be work across the grade level, and then you're grouping. This is my opinion, okay? So I wouldn't say that research says this is the way it must happen, but my opinion is that ideally you would group kids by their skill and work through the scope and sequence with them, but because you'd be working with other teachers, they're not spending 45 minutes alone. But also, I know this is another concern of Casey's, that the lower kids don't catch up. You need to have a system where they're getting tier 2 support so that they're getting a double dose every day, because I agree. If you're grouping them by skill and you've got kids way behind and you're not doing anything extra for them, the gap is never going to be closed. It may just widen. So I think the criticisms on both sides probably are looking at each side in the worst possible light, right? So like when I criticize whole group phonics instruction, I'm criticizing lack of differentiation, lack of challenge, lack of hearing individual kids read, where some teachers are able to make that happen. People that are criticizing the small group from the start are criticizing too much time doing independent work, not giving kids chances to catch up. Whereas if you are doing this with the support of other staff, you could give kids less independent work time. You could give kids an extra dose. So I think it's a conversation worth having, but I think both sides need to be thinking critically about how we could fix the problems in each approach. I don't think it's a straight answer, but I think I don't think either one is always right or always wrong.
Judy, your thoughts to finish up?
I thought that was a beautiful piece that you just spoke. I think that, this is such a wonderful time in literacy that we are actually having such granular conversations and getting down to the nitty gritty. And you could just feel your energy of doing the work, Anna. You could feel that you do the work. I think that what Anna says resonates with me very much so. Yes, we do want to strengthen the core. We know that tier 1 instruction is very, very important, but we also need to think about our tier 2 and our tier 3. And I think the other piece that's really important, when we're giving kids a double dose, sometimes that's not enough. I think that the double dose is nice, but let's also get them reading after they do their double dose.
Oh, for
Let's
sure.
prioritize the application piece, because if we don't, we won't get the results we want. And also, guys, it's crunch time. The school year is almost over. Make sure you're still progress monitoring and listening to those kids read. And if you don't get the results you all wanted this year, next year we'll get it right. It's going to take a little time to shift that data, but we're all on a good path now, I think.
So here's something that was not mentioned, and it did not come up, but what drives me crazy is seeing kids not looking at the front of the room, at the teacher. Instead, they're sitting in these pods looking at each other. When, if it's whole group instruction, the class should be looking at the teacher. We don't go to a movie theater and sit sideways or in these crazy directions. We always want a good seat at the movies. And I really think that one of the things we should do, and I don't know if there's any evidence, this is my opinion, maybe there is evidence, we should all consider when kids are in whole group that they are facing the teacher and then don't have to write in some crazy ways, and that when they are working together in small group, then they could look at each other and be part of a group. But I do think that classroom management and seating arrangement is very important, especially for kids with difficulties. So that's my 2 cents.
That's so interesting you say that, because definitely explicit instruction has been a big thing for me, like understanding the structural literacy and science, because that was not how I was taught for sure. And I thought that was not a way I wanted to teach. So I would go into classrooms and I would see desks that were all rows facing the front. And I would think, that's not a very creative teacher. But I understand now, I do. And I think it's nice to have opportunities for them to turn and talk. But
Correct.
when you're doing that explicit direct instruction with the phonics and phonemic awareness, you need them right there with you. You can't do that quick, snappy, as perky pace like Anita Archer talks about, unless their eyes are right on you. So I totally agree, and that's a really good point.
Okay, so let's wrap this baby up. So,
all right, we're wrapping up. Okay, one last thing though, make sure kids are holding books. I want to see more holding, touching, feeling, holding books in their hands. Anyway, we're wrapping up. You could find us on the literacyview.com new website. It's getting better and better. Faith and I are having a meeting with our website person soon. You could find us on Instagram, The Literacy View. You could find us on Facebook. Join our group. Our numbers are growing and growing and growing. Write us a good review. The Literacy View. Faith is on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. You know where to find us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Anna. And look for Anna's book coming out in July, and that is Reaching All Readers. Am I correct?
Reach all readers. Yep.
Reach all readers. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And everyone have a happy Mother's Day.